I'd like to welcome everybody to the benefits of bats, or also attracting bats to our backyard. My name is John Matthew Polpeter. I'm one of the naturalists here at the Woodlands Nature Station. On behalf of the U.S. Forest Service and the Friends of Land Between Lakes, I welcome everybody that decided to join us on kind of a blustery day today. A couple things I want to note. One, on typical Zoom webinars, you might see the presenter. On this particular one, your presenter is a blind person. So for me to be able to see the screen, we have it a little bit darker in the room, so it's harder to see me. Also, we encourage people to ask questions. I have Shannon Brockway currently here that will be monitoring any kind of questions through the Q&A button or the chat now button. She'll try to answer what she can. If she can't answer something during the time of the program, then I will answer them at the end of the program. So we're going to kind of cover some of the basic information about bats and Kentucky bats in particular, and then also how we can bring them into our backyard and what are those benefits that we're going to receive. So I think what we're going to do is go ahead and get started. And as I said, if you got any questions as we go along, feel free to ask in the Q&A or the chat now. And let's go take a look. I think the first thing we're going to do is take a bat quiz. One of the things that I always like about these type of programs is kind of get a basis of information. So let's see how much you guys know about the bats around you. So the first question, myth or reality? There are 2 species of Kentucky bats that drink blood. I'll give you a second. What do you think? Actually, the answer is that's a myth. Of all the bats, 17 species of bats that we have in the state of Kentucky and probably Tennessee as well, all of them are insectivores. They eat only insects. There is not a single one in Kentucky that will drink your blood. Now, with recent warming climate, they have started seeing some vampire bats showing up on the border of Texas. But nothing beyond that. And I doubt they get any closer to that because of even the cold temperatures of Texas will probably stop. Here's a short video about vampire bats. Only 3 species found in the world, all in Central and South America. No audio. You? I'm sorry, you might not be getting any audio with this. Basically, there are 3 species of bats that drink blood in Central and South America. These particular bats will generally hit livestock more than they hit humans. So they're not really a problem. One of the neat things about vampire bats is that they actually have friends and they will hang out with their friends their entire lifespan. And when one of their friends is sick, they will actually donate blood to them to keep them healthy. So kind of interesting about vampire bats. I'm sorry that you didn't actually hear that. So no audio for that? No, that means the other ones won't. Okay. Okay. So, all right, myth number 2. All bats carry rabies. What do you guys think? The answer to that, of course, is it's kind of a tougher one because all bats have the capability of carrying rabies because they're mammals, just like all humans on the planet Earth can carry rabies because they're mammals as well. But only 1/2 of all bats here in the United States carry rabies. One of the things that people often wonder about and get a question about is what happens when I find a bat? How do I know it has rabies? Well, according to the CDC, bats get something we call dumb rabies, which means you'll usually find them on the ground, and within 48 hours, they usually pass away. They are not aggressive. That's the purpose of the dumb rabies, because they act sick. This virus really hits them hard, and they are not like Cujo that you see in the movies or Old Yeller when you get bit by the wolf. So these guys are pretty harmless even when they have rabies, unless you pick them up. And the best thing is never to touch any animal that's acting unusual on the ground. Call your wildlife expert to be able to help you. All right. Myth number 3. All right. Do bats intentionally fly into your hair? Can they fly into your hair? Of course, that is also a myth. They do fly very close. Bats are very good at navigating at night with the radar or their echolocation. Unless somebody quickly moves in front of them, they're never going to run into a person's hair. But what are they going after that's close to that person's head? And that, of course, is insects. Any mosquitoes or bugs that are attracted to you because of your body heat, your carbon dioxide that you're breathing out is going to attract insects, and insects are going to attract bats. But they don't want to get into your hair. All right. Bats are blind. Actually, that's another myth. Bats are not blind. All bats can see, and some can actually see quite well. There are 2 groups of bats, one called the mega bats, or the flying foxes, and they only navigate through eyesight. They rarely have any kind of echolocation, but your microbats, which are the kind that we have here in Kentucky, will use a lot of echolocation, but they also have very good eyesight. So that's a misnomer. All right, after sunset, bats turn into strange Eastern European men with strong accents. Is that a myth or reality? Of course, that is a myth. The vampire myth has been persisting since even the times before the Greeks and the Egyptians. It is worldwide. The myth is about vampires. Somehow, a little bit later in time, the bats got associated with vampires, particularly around the Bram Stoker time, the 19th century book about Dracula, and that's where you kind of get like the Count or Grandpa Munster here. Bats are flying mice. Is that a myth or reality? That is also a myth. Actually, bats and rodents are mammals, and that's about the extent of them. They have live birth, they give milk, they have fur, but on the family tree, the bats are more closely related to carnivores, things like dogs, cats, and bears. All right. Another myth or reality is the giant crowned flying fox is the largest bat in the world, the 7-foot wingspan. Is that a myth or reality? Can they get that big? Well, fun fact, actually, the smallest mammal in the world is the bumblebee bat, also known as a Kiki's hog-nosed bat, that is found in Thailand. It's the size of your thumbnail. So can the giant crowned bat be the largest of all the bats with the 7-foot wingspan? That is a reality. Imagine that. Take a look at that picture of that flying fox with its wings spread out. That is a large animal. Mainly flying foxes are not found in the New World. You're only going to find them in the Old World. So Australia, South Pacific, and Asia, and parts of Africa are the only places you can find them. This particular fellow is found in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. Can bats make banana splits? The answer is yes, reality. Bats, especially tropical bats, are very important for pollination. What they do is they pollinate many of the products that we get from the South America, Central America, Africa, Australia, Asia. Some of the products that we have in our kitchens every day. Bananas, peaches, cashews are just a few of the species of food that we use. Figs is another one, if you like fig Newtons, that are important, that make it easier for bats. If you like margaritas with your Mexican meal, think of bats. A lot of products that we use every day are important for bats. In fact, actually, bats provide more ecological services than any other mammal in the world, even the ones that we eat like cows and pigs. All right, so let's kind of get into some of just the basic biology of bats. What is a bat? I mentioned earlier they are a mammal. They produce live young. They're placentals. They give milk. They have fur. They can actually live to be about 40 years of age, especially some of the smaller ones can. There are about 1,400 species of bats in the world. That's the second most diverse mammal group that you're going to find. Rodents, of course, being the number one, mice and rats. But bats, there are about 1,400. They're broken into two groups. They're the mega bats, which are your flying foxes, and there's about 200 of those in the world, and they're all found in the old world. And then there are 1,200 other bats. These are the micro bats, and these are the ones we have in Kentucky. So they're all the tiny little bats that you find all throughout the world. Here we have about 40 species in the United States and 17 in the state of Kentucky and Tennessee. Bats are the only flying mammal that you're going to find in the world. They do not glide like your flying squirrels do. If you take a look at their wing structure, they actually is an extended hand. So if you stuck your thumb on top of your head and then your fingers stretched all the way to the floor, that is the equivalent to a bat's wing. And then you have a membrane stretched in between it. In contrast, a bird's wing is mainly extended arm bones, or a pterodactyl was extended finger. So these are an extended hand when it's flight. One of the cool facts about bats in flight is that a Brazilian free-tailed bat can actually fly up to 98 miles per hour. And that bat is not found in Kentucky, but it has been spotted in Florida. So it is a U.S. species. The fastest bat in the world. Of course, bats, most of the micro bats, large bats like the mega bats do not really use echolocation, but the micro bats do. The 1,200 species. And that is basically they're bouncing that sound off in the air to be able to get a picture in their brain of what is going on around them. And then that bounce, it's emitted through their mouth or through their nose, and then comes back to the ears. So let's take a look at a video that shows this, of a bat following a moth. So you're going to see the bat emitting sound, and it's too high of a pitch for us to be able to hear. If you hear bats, that is usually a domestic dispute. They are not happy. They're arguing with each other or arguing with us. The sounds that we hear from bats are not good sounds, but a lot of the ultrasounds that they use to hunt or to navigate through the forest are way beyond our capabilities of hearing. And as they get close to a moth, it gets louder and louder and bounces quicker and quicker back to be able to feed them. All right, so it kind of gives you an illustration of how that works. And some moths even have the capability of not being able to, or they can hear the bat's echolocation. They'll duck and dive before they get to it. The next slide, because we're having trouble with some of the sound, we're going to just go ahead and skip. And then we'll kind of get into what is bats' favorite food. As mentioned before, all 17 species of bats that we have in Kentucky and Tennessee are insectivores. That's all they eat is insects. There are bats in this world that eat everything from blood, as we mentioned with the vampire bats, to things like frogs. There are bats that eat fish. They pull them out of the water like an osprey does. There are bats that even eat other bats. Bats that eat birds. Bats eat spiders. So there's a wide variety of different bats out there. A lot of times even bats are pollinators or fruit eaters. All the mega bats eat just fruit. All right. One of the things I always like to point out to people is how bats are the gardener's friend. In fact, they're the best friend. A little brown bat can eat 1,000 mosquitoes in an hour, sometimes even more than that. Though really a lot of times little brown bats are not going to eat mosquitoes because there's not much to mosquitoes. That would be the equivalent to us eating a slice of pizza compared to a M&M. Now there is one species of bat that we do have here that does come to a bat house called a southeastern myotis. It does exclusively look into eating mosquitoes, but unfortunately they're just not as common as, say, the little brown bat. Some of the other things that bats eat that are a little bit more higher on the menu is those cucumber beetles, June bugs, cutworm moths, leaf hoppers. These are all things that can damage our gardens but bats can, especially if you have a bat house, can help control. About $4 billion a year of money is saved by farmers because of bats, particularly big brown bats. Bats that do come to bat houses. That's worthwhile keeping them around. Well, where are you going to find bats here in Kentucky? Most of the, we are mostly eastern deciduous forests, especially if you come here at Land Between Lakes, we're 90% forested. And we also in Kentucky and Tennessee have this great thing called karst limestone topography, or geology, and that produces a lot of caves and crevices for these bats to be able to hibernate. In the forest, you're going to find a lot of times the bats are going to be naturally in trees that have what we call sloughing bark, like this shagbark hickory or shellbark hickory. Sometimes some of the oaks, some of the sycamores will also have this kind of sloughing off bark, and that's where you'll find most of your bats during the summer months raising their babies. During the winter, they're going to have to go into the cave systems. That's mainly where you're going to find bats, most bats during the winter months. And that's because caves tend to keep their temperature and moisture conditions very similar all throughout the year. So bats can count on that for a safe place to be able to hibernate. If you've ever been to Mammoth Cave, in the summer it's 54 degrees, in the winter it's 54 degrees. That is the stability that a bat needs to be able to hibernate. And our bats here in Kentucky hibernate in two different ways. There are some bats, like our tree-dwelling bats, red bats and hoary bats, that will actually hibernate out in the forest. While other bats, majority of other bats will actually hibernate in caves because of those stable temperatures. They're able to lower their own body temperature because bats are one of the few animals that actually hibernate, like groundhogs, where they lower their respiration, they lower their heart rate, and they lower their body temperature. And they crowd all into a cave because that cave has that stable temperature and moisture level. It becomes quite important for their conservation here in the future. Now, one of the bats that I mentioned before are the red bats, and they tend to look just like a dead oak leaf. And if you've ever noticed, throughout the winter months, oak leaves don't always lose all their leaves. And they lose about 2/3 of the leaves and leave about another third until spring till the new stuff comes in. Red bats hang out in these leaf clusters. If you look at your oak tree, you might actually see a bat that's trying to camouflage itself as an oak leaf. It can do this to about 23 degrees. And then after that, it has to hide under the leaf litter that's on the forest floor. See if you can find the bat in this picture. It is a red bat. How about there? They hide very well, they blend in. One of the ways that we found out that they like to live in the leaf litter on the bottom of the floor is through prescribed fires. The bats would wake up and fly right before the fire got to them. So of course, just like anything, bats have predators. And here at the Nature Station, we've seen a couple predation from raccoons and black rat snakes that will hit our bat boxes. You have to kind of design the bat boxes to be able to avoid these. But also things like hawks and owls and house cats are also great predators of bats and cause a lot of problems. All right, so one of the biggest problems that we're finding now, when I got into this field, I wanted to protect tigers and bears, polar bears and elephants, and I still want to do those things, but now I'm finding it's necessary to protect the things that we have in our backyard because there are a lot of different kinds of invasive species that are impacting them. One of these invasive species showed up in 2006 and has basically wiped out most of the bats that we have in the eastern United States. We've lost about 7 million little brown bats to this disease. It's a fungus that came from Europe and somehow got into our cave system. And what usually happens is that this fungus grows on the bat while they're hibernating in the middle of winter. It's an irritating fungus that they're not accustomed to, and they usually are forced to wake up. When they wake up, unfortunately, they have to burn up a lot of their fat reserves, a lot of their energy, to be able to bring their body temperature back up to an active level. When they do that, they have to rebuild those fat reserves. And the best way to do it is to eat more insects. Well, if it's in the middle of January and there's snow on the ground and no insects, they're not going to survive. So a lot of these bats, like the little brown bats particularly, will fly out of their caves, hit the cold weather, and immediately die. One of the places they find a lot of dead bats is at the entrance of a cave. Unfortunately, this disease has been spreading all across the country. It's now on the West Coast. It mainly hits temperate regions. Places like Florida are probably not a big problem because they don't have a lot of caves and a lot of winter conditions that the bats have to worry about. They can be active all year round. Luckily, with recent reports, some of the caves that have been most devastated by white nose syndrome are in better conditions now, as the bats are getting used to the white nose syndrome and becoming, their populations are growing. Unfortunately, we will not see the numbers of bats that we used to have in 2006 until well after we've all passed away. All right, so let's talk about some of the Kentucky bats that we have here and some of the different species that might come to a bat house. First of all, the most common bat that we have is the red bat, sometimes known as the teddy bear bat, because it has a face very much like a teddy bear. These are the ones that you're going to see all year round in the state of Kentucky and Tennessee. So if you're out like hiking on one of our trails in January, and let's say it's about 6 degrees, and you see a bat flying around, it's a good chance that it's one of these red bats. They're more cold tolerant, and they do not hibernate in caves. They're one of the few bats also that has multiple young. Most bats have one baby. Red bats can have up to 2 or 3. The hoary bat is the largest of all the bats that we have here in Kentucky. They can actually have a wingspan about 18 inches to 20 inches long. They kind of got a grayish white fur. Oddly enough, it's one of the few bats that have actually made it to Hawaii. We have them here during the summer months, and during the winter months, they can still be found here, but it's mainly one gender. The females that stick around here, the males will migrate to another location. Often we don't see these hoary bats because they hang out towards the top of the canopy. Probably the 2 most important bats that we have for our backyards are the little brown bats and the big brown bats. Not necessarily related, just have similar names. The little brown bats are the most common bat that we have in the United States, and they are often the ones that you're going to get in your attic. They're often the ones that you're going to get in your barn or that's going to occupy your bat house. Big brown bats are also one that's very commonly found in your bat house. They don't usually come in large numbers. So we have a bat house here at the Nature Station. It used to hold, before white nose, 500 little brown bats. It now probably has about 100 big brown bats in there because the big browns may not necessarily hibernate in caves, but in barns and attics and bat houses. So they're not impacted by the white nose. Both of them are very beneficial for eating insects in your yard. Of course, some of the most common endangered species that we have in the state of Kentucky and Tennessee are our bats, especially as far as considering mammals. The gray bat, the Indiana bat, which is found in big open fields like grasslands and farmlands. The northern long-eared bat is one of those species that I think is important because when we first put up bat houses, it was the first one to occupy our bat roosting houses. Those houses actually provided a good shelter, good maternity ward for a very highly endangered species that ate lots of mosquitoes and other bugs as well in our yard. So what are some of the things that you can do to kind of help to help bats in your neighborhood, in your yard? Well, the first thing is you can learn as much as you can about some of the bats that you're going to find around, particularly those 17 species of bats, like in this bat webinar. One of the other things, of course, is to support some of the local organizations or the international organizations that help support bats. Bat Conservation International, Luby Bat Conservation in Florida, National Wildlife Federation. These are some organizations that spend time to be able to protect bats all throughout this country as well as throughout the world. The best thing that you can do is leave a little bit, a corner of your yard a little bit wild. Let the bushes grow up, maybe have a brush pile, leave a snag, maybe a hollow log, something that might attract the insects that the bats need to eat, or maybe a shelter where they can hide. Because not only all bats come to bat houses, like those tree bats, for instance, don't usually come to those. Some bats just live singly, like a silver-haired bat. So by having a wild corner, a place that has like a snag or some sloughing off bark from a shagbark hickory, as long as it's safe for humans, can be a great addition for attracting bats to your backyard. But let's talk about bats in your garden. Some of the ways that you guys can do, besides just the wild places, that you can attract bats to your backyard. One of the ways is by planting some different kinds of native plants. We always encourage native plants because native plants are what the native wildlife is accustomed to. And we don't have any pollinating bats here in the state of Kentucky and Tennessee. So there's not a plant that you can plant that will attract a bat for nectar. But you can attract the food that bats like to eat, like moths, through some of these plants, like spider lily and purple coneflower and some of the asters and evening primrose. These attract a lot of different kinds of moths that then the bats are able to enjoy to eat. Some of the mallows is also another good option. They have usually a sweet smell and a pretty white flower or bright flower that will show up for the moths to be able to see at the middle of the night. So if you have moths, you'll have bats. But one of the easiest things that you can do, and one of the most critical things for helping bats, or attracting bats, is by building bat houses. Here are a few examples of some different designs of bat houses. Many of those bat organizations I had mentioned earlier, like Bat Conservation International or the Luby Bat Conservancy, have many of these plans, designs on their website. You may even be able to purchase an already built bat house through one of those organizations, and you know it will be done right, and you'll support that organization. Here is a picture of some of the bats that we have in our bat house. We have both the rocket design and what we call the economy design, which you can find in the Bat Builder's Handbook that's on BCI. You can actually download their PDF. It's a 40-page book, but it'll have all the different designs that you can get. Our bat houses, like our big one, can hold up to 500 bats, and then the rocket boxes, that you'll see a little bit later, can hold up to 50 to 100 bats. When it comes to putting up a bat house, the critical thing with them, a lot of people always ask, how can I get bats? Is time. You're just going to have some time to meet some of the, as close to the optimum as you possibly can. It's a wide variance of different conditions that may attract bats. Just because you build it doesn't necessarily mean they will come. But the closest you can get to some of these features that I talk about means the greater chance that you will have to attract bats. Of course, the first thing that you need to worry about is that when you build your bat box, all the wood that the bats will touch, so the inside of the bat box, even the parts of the outside, need to be untreated wood. You wouldn't want a chemical on the bed that you sleep on every night because it's not going to be good for your respiratory system. Same thing with the bats. Even though they might be able to tolerate a little bit, untreated wood will be much better for these animals because they're able to live in it pretty carefully. Also, the entrance to the bat house has to be about a 3/4 inch groove on the bottom. This will allow for the bats to enter in and out, which seems kind of small, but not allow things like house sparrows, and it will deter wasps from coming into the bat house itself. A lot of times you want to keep the bat house kind of a dark color, especially in places like Kentucky and Tennessee. If you're from Florida, from Texas, or Arizona, you may need to paint the bat house a little bit lighter color. Bats like the house hot. It helps keep away some of the parasites that they might get, but also it means that they don't have to spend as much energy in trying to keep their body temperature up warm. You will still need to add ventilation, especially towards the bottom, because you want a nice temperature gradient. So on those cold days, such as it is today, they can go climb towards the top of the box. where if it's a warm day, they can go towards the bottom and stick their heads out and get a nice fresh breeze. All right, so let's talk about some of the things also that are important, like height and orientation. As far as orientation, the main thing that you need to kind of think about is that bats, because they want to get that sun on them, they need an east-west orientation. So they want to get that rising sun in the morning, especially when it's the coldest, and then they really like the afternoon sun that hits them in the evening. The optimum height for a bat box, what we have found that does the best, is to have it between 12 and 16 feet. It does not mean that you can't have it at 8 feet or even at 6 feet or at 20 feet. But when you get away from those ranges, you have a little bit more trouble. 20 feet means you're going to have a little more trouble with wind. 6 or 8 feet means that you might have a little bit more trouble with predation. So in most recommendations, it says about 12 to 16 feet. Okay. The other thing I also like to mention is that you'll have a better success for two different things if you put up multiple bat houses. And that's that way, if one of them gets some parasites in it or they don't like the temperature gradient, you can maybe go to one of the other ones. Maybe a predator has figured out a way to get into one but not the others. So the bats will go from one to the other and have a little bit better success. But if you want to get bats in as soon as possible, the best thing you could do is put in the bat house prior to April. I actually think this is a good time of the year to kind of put up bat boxes because it allows it to overwinter and get more accustomed, get that human smell out of there, and it make it a little bit more weathered, and you'll have a better success in getting bats. We have always had good success with the rocket boxes and getting them in if we had those bat boxes up before April. That's when they start to occupy them. When it comes to placement, like people always ask, where do we want to put these? Well, bats typically are going to be living in the forest. As I mentioned, they're going to be living under that sloughing bark and those snags of trees, maybe in clumps of leaves, maybe in a cliff face somewhere. So what you need to do is make sure that you they're going to feed in an open field where all the moss are. And so by putting the bat boxes on the edge of a wood line, where it can also get some sun, is a great place for bats to be able to occupy them. Also, if you have water within a quarter mile, whether that's a creek, a river, a lake, a farm pond, that would be perfect. Even a swimming pool or a backyard fish pond is enough water for those bats to feel kind of comfortable and have greater success in having bats occupy your bat house. Also, you might want to think about not having those bat boxes around high activity areas, particularly like playgrounds and stuff like that. Now, how do you know that you have bats? Well, in Kentucky and Tennessee, we have 6 species of bats that occupy our bat boxes. So there's a good chance that, some bat lives in your area that's going to do it. Most likely it's going to be little browns or big browns. How do you know those guys have started making in there? Well, one obvious way is vocalizations. Remember, I said we can't hear most of the vocalizations of bats, but we can hear them when they are disputing against each other. So what happens a lot of times is these bats will argue with each other because they're touching each other, they're too close to each other. It's like two kids in the back of the car. Mommy's touching me, that kind of thing. They're scream out loud, trying to grab the attention of each other. We hear that noise. We don't hear their normal feeding calls. The other way is through their bathroom, by going to the bathroom. Guano is what we call it. And a bat will go to the bathroom before they go into a bat house or when they come out of a bat house. So because all our bats eat insects, what you need to do is either look at the plants that are underneath the bat house, see if there's a shiny sheen of little insect parts that the bats have disposed down there. Or you can sometimes, if that's a little difficult, because it's a mowed lawn or it's just not always easy to see, you can take a piece of paper overnight and put it underneath the bat house. When the bats go in there, they'll go to the bathroom, that will land on the paper and make it a little bit easier for you to see if your bat house is occupied. Bats will occupy those houses from April to October. Sometimes you'll get big browns that will stay in there in the winter months, if you're lucky. All right. So what we don't want to do, one of the other things that often happens with bats if we want to protect them is we can go into caves and disturb them. Most caves that are significant to bats are being protected. They usually have kind of a bat gate that goes across the entrance. You may see this if you've ever been to Mammoth Cave. But there are still a few bat caves out there that are on private hands that are very important or critical for those bats to be able to survive. The best thing that you can do is just not go in those during the winter months, because if you go in there in the winter months, that you may disturb them and they may not be able to survive. They've already got a tough road. Often people will ask about eviction. One of the problems that you're going to find is that bats are going to go into your house, and how do you be able to get them out of there? Well, during the summer months, if they have babies in there, probably the best thing to do is just let them do that, and then maybe as they leave for their winter hibernation caves, you board up the area that they are in. If you can get to it early enough before they start having babies and find the entrance hole, you could buy from Bat Conservation International a device that will exclude them from that. And you want to put that in there in evening hours when they're already out feeding, not during the daytime when they're sleeping. Though sometimes these things allow the bats to get out at night but not get back in. So you might be able to buy one that you could put up during the day too. So that kind of gives you an idea of how to attract bats to your backyard, some simple things. But what I'd like to do is open up the floor by doing a Q&A or a chat now question to Shannon and be able to answer those questions for you specifically. And because we went through that information kind of quickly. So I hope you enjoyed my program, and I'll be open for any questions. Does anybody have any questions? I'll give you some time to type them in. If not, you are welcome to get all the information that you need from the Bat Conservation International. You can stop by the Nature Station or ask us to send you one of our bat brochures with some of the plans. I would highly recommend you coming to the Nature Station and seeing our bat houses. Right now, they're not occupied, but next April they will be. They've already left for the year because of this cold weather.
I think you've answered all of my questions.
Oh, good. Well, I hope I covered it thoroughly for everybody. Any other questions? Yeah, if you have further questions that you may not have now but pop up later, you can always go to our at Woodlands Nature Station Facebook page and post them there, and we can get them back to you very easily. I hope one of the things that we're doing this week and why we did the bat attracting bats this week is because it's a good time to put up Bat House, but also it's International Bat Week, where we're trying to get more information out about these great animals that we have in our backyard. All right, it doesn't look like we have any further questions, so I hope you guys have a warm rest of the day. And like I said, if you have any other questions, contact us at Woodlands Nature Station. Thank you.